My name is Serena, and at 30 years old, I never thought I would feel like a stranger in my own family home. Growing up in our spacious Chicago suburb house, I always felt slightly less important than my younger brother, Michael. But nothing prepared me for that fateful dinner when my spot at the table was given to my brother's new wife, Isabella. Mom looked me straight in the eyes and said those words, I will never forget. You do not belong here anymore. I left quietly holding back tears until Grandpa George called me back with 5 shocking words that if you are watching this, I would love to know where you are viewing from. Take a second to like and subscribe before I continue my story, because what happened next changed everything about my family dynamic forever. The house I grew up in was not just any house. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with white columns and a wraparound porch in an upscale Chicago suburb. My grandfather George built it with his own 2 hands back in the 60s, expanding it over the decades as our family grew. Every corner held memories, from height marks penciled on the kitchen door frame to the secret hideout Michael and I made under the stairs. Speaking of Michael, he is my younger brother by 4 years. When we were kids, we were inseparable. I remember pulling him in a little red wagon around the neighborhood, teaching him how to ride a bike on our long driveway, and defending him from bullies at school. We had the kind of sibling bond that made other parents comment on how well we got along, that I braided his teddy bear's fur while he collected bugs for me to examine under the little microscope I got for my 10th birthday. We built snow forts together every winter and caught fireflies in jars during summer evenings, but as we grew older, things changed. By high school, the close bond we shared had started to fray at the edges. Michael became the star quarterback on the football team, while I threw myself into academics and the debate club. Our paths diverged, and so did our relationship. The change was subtle at first, a missed movie night here, a forgotten birthday card there. But by the time Michael entered high school while I was preparing for college, we were practically strangers living under the same roof. My parents, Robert and Christine, were not the warm, fuzzy type. Dad worked as a corporate attorney at a prestigious Chicago law firm, and Mom managed the social calendar with military precision. They had expectations, and those expectations were always higher for me than for Michael. Serena, an A- is essentially a B. You can do better, my father would say, barely glancing at my report card. Meanwhile, Michael would be praised for bringing home C's because at least he is balancing sports and academics. Mom was no different. Stand up straight, Serena. No one wants to hear your opinion on politics. Men do not find that attractive, she would whisper harshly at dinner parties. Yet, when Michael spoke up about the same topics, he was showing leadership potential. The double standard was exhausting, and by the time I turned 20, I was desperate to escape. I applied to colleges as far from Chicago as possible, finally settling on University of Washington, a whole country away from the constant scrutiny and comparison. The day I left for college was the first time I felt like I could breathe freely. College was transformative for me. I thrived academically, made genuine friends who appreciated my intelligence and wit, and eventually graduated summa cum laude with a degree in environmental law. I secured a position at a respected firm in Seattle that specialized in corporate sustainability, making a salary that allowed me to live comfortably in one of the most expensive cities in America. But my accomplishments seemed to evaporate the moment I crossed the threshold of my family home during visits. Environmental law. Is that even real law? My father would scoff, when are you going to find a husband and settle down? My mother would ask before I had even unpacked my suitcase. Why brother Michael followed a more traditional path, attending Northwestern just 20 minutes from home, where my parents attended every one of his football games. He joined our father's law firm after graduation, became engaged to his college girlfriend, Isabella, and bought a house just 10 minutes from our parents, the perfect son following the prescribed path. The only person who ever truly seemed proud of me was my grandfather. George. Grandpa was different from the rest of the family, a self-made man who built his construction business from nothing. He valued hard work and independent thinking. During my rare visits home, he would pull me aside for private conversations. Tell me about those Pacific Northwest forests you are saving, he would say. Genuine interest, sparkling in his faded blue eyes. Your grandmother would have been so proud of you standing up for what you believe in. Grandma Margaret had passed away 6 years ago, but I had always felt a special connection to her. She was strong-willed and quietly rebellious in her own way. She had been the first woman in her family to attend college back in the 50s, and she always encouraged my academic pursuits. After she died, Grandpa moved into the guest house on our family property, saying the main house had too many memories. The tension in our family reached new heights when Michael proposed to Isabella. She was beautiful, from a good family, and most importantly, she was the daughter of one of my father's business associates. From the moment my parents met her, she could do no wrong. The wedding was an extravagant affair. COV. Aired in Chicago society, pages with me relegated to the role of bridesmaid despite having barely exchanged 10 sentences with Isabella before the engagement. Try not to talk about your environmental crusades during the reception, my mother advised as she adjusted my bridesmaid dress. This is Michael and Isabella's day. No one wants to hear about endangered frogs or whatever it is you do. That I bit my tongue, smiled for the photographs, and flew back to Seattle the morning after the wedding, promising myself it would be at least 6 months before I subjected myself to another family visit. Little did I know that the next time I returned home would completely upend our family dynamic forever. Isabella Lopez Gibson was everything my parents ever wanted in a daughter-in-law, with her glossy dark hair, perfect white teeth, and Stanford business degree. She embodied the ideal that my mother had tried to mold me into for years. The daughter of Victor Gibson, one of my father's most important business contacts, Isabella had connections that made my father's eyes light up with opportunity. The first time I met her was at a family dinner during one of my brief visits home. She arrived wearing a modest but clearly designer dress, carrying a homemade apple pie that she claimed was just thrown together this morning. My mother practically swooned. "Oh, Isabella, you should give Serena some baking tips. She never quite took to the domestic arts," my mother said, patting Isabella's hand while shooting me a pointed look. "I would love to," Isabella replied with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Maybe we can make it a girls' day. I could help with your wardrobe, too." Seattle style is so unique that I forced a smile and changed the subject, but that set the tone for our relationship. Isabella was a master at the subtle dig disguised as helpful concern, and my parents ate it up. After Michigan AEL and Isabella got engaged, the changes in our family dynamic became impossible to ignore. Sunday dinners, once a somewhat neutral territory, became the Isabella show. My mother consulted her on menu choices. My father asked for her opinion on his investments, and Michael gazed at her adoringly as if she hung the moon. Meanwhile, I was increasingly pushed to the periphery. My seat at the dinner table, always to my father's left, was given to Isabella. My childhood bedroom was converted into Isabella's home office whenever they stayed over, with my belongings boxed up and moved to the attic, without my knowledge or consent. "We need to make room for the next generation," my mother explained when I discovered my high school debate trophies in a cardboard box. "Isabella needs space to work when she and Michael visit. You are hardly ever here anyway." Every attempt I made to fit in with the new family order was met with indifference or outright dismissal. When I brought an expensive bottle of wine to dinner, my father commented that it was a bit pretentious. When I offered to cook a meal using organic ingredients from a local farmer's market, my mother insisted on helping, which meant taking over completely and adding butter and cream to my carefully planned vegan dish. Behind my back, Isabella's comments grew increasingly cutting. Through a cousin who still kept in touch with me, I learned that Isabella referred to me as the family charity case and mocked my career choice as playing in the dirt with hippies, but to my face, she was all saccharine smiles and backhanded compliments. "That outfit is so brave, Serena." I could never pull off something so casual at a family dinner. "Your apartment in Seattle sounds cozy. It must be nice not having to worry about maintaining a real house. Your job sounds so fulfilling. It must be nice to prioritize passion over financial security." Each comment was designed to diminish me while making her look gracious and concerned, and It worked brilliantly on my family. My brother Michael, who once would have defended me against anyone, began to echo Isabella's sentiments. "Serena, maybe it is time to think about moving back to Chicago and getting a real job," he suggested during a rare phone call. "Dad could find you something at the firm. You are 32 next year. Time to get serious." "I am serious about my career," I replied, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "I just made junior partner at an environmental firm. he said in a tone that made it clear what he thought of that achievement. Isabella thinks you would be happier with a more traditional path, she worries about you being alone out there. That was the moment I realized I had lost my brother completely, that he was no longer seeing the world through his own eyes, but through Isabella's carefully crafted lens. That I tried once to address the issue directly with my parents. During a visit home for Thanksgiving, I pulled my mother aside while she prepared cranberry sauce. Mom, I feel like ever since Michael married Isabella, I have become an outsider in this family, I said carefully. My mother set down her wooden spoon and gave me a look that was part pity, part exasperation. Serena, you made yourself an outsider when you moved across the country and rejected everything we taught you. Isabella embraces family values. She is here building a life with Michael, giving us the possibility of grandchildren. What are you giving this family except criticism and strange ideas? Her words stung like a slap. That I retreated to the guest room, packed my bag, and booked an earlier flight back to Seattle. My father did not even come out of his study to say goodbye. After that disastrous Thanksgiving, I made a conscious decision to create distance. That I declined the Christmas invitation, citing a work emergency. That I sent birthday and anniversary gifts by mail rather and delivering them in person. I built a life in Seattle filled with friends who respected me, colleagues who valued my contributions, and eventually a small but beautiful apartment that I purchased with my own money, the down payment saved dollar by dollar from my hard-earned salary. Chicago and the family home became increasingly distant in my mind, a place of old wounds rather than warm memories. That I threw myself into my work, taking on additional cases, speaking at conferences, building a reputation in my field. External success helped mask the internal pain of being the family disappointment. The irony was that by conventional standards, I was doing extremely well. That I had a respected career, financial independence, and a fulfilling life, but in my family's eyes, without a husband and children, without a willingness to conform to their expectations, I had failed. For almost 3 years, I maintained this careful distance, connecting with my grandfather through weekly phone calls, but interacting with the rest of the family only through obligatory holiday texts and occasional stilted phone conversations. That it was not ideal, but it was safer for my emotional well-being. Then came the phone call that would change everything. That it was a Tuesday evening in April when my phone rang, displaying my mother's name. That I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for the usual mix of criticism and obligation. Serena, dear, how are you? My mother's voice had that forced brightness that immediately put me on edge. That I am fine, Mom. Busy with work. How are you and Dad? We are wonderful. Listen, darling, we are having a special family dinner this Saturday, and we would love for you to come. It has been too long since we have all been together. The request caught me off guard. There were no holidays or birthdays on the horizon, nothing that would normally prompt a special family dinner. This Saturday, Mom, that is only 4 days away. That I cannot just drop everything and fly across the country. That we will pay for your ticket, of course, she said quickly. That it is really important that you be here. The whole family will be together. There was something in her tone, an unusual insistence, that piqued my curiosity. My mother rarely pleaded for anything. Is everything okay? Is Grandpa all right? Your grandfather is fine, better than fine. She paused. Serena, please. It would mean a lot to your father and me if you would make the effort just this once. The guilt trip was familiar territory, but the underlying urgency was new. Against my better judgment, a tiny flame of hope flickered to life. Maybe they were finally recognizing my absence as a loss. Maybe this was an olive branch, an attempt to repair our fractured relationship. Okay, I said finally. I will see what I can do about work. Text me the details. After ending the call, I sat staring at my phone for several long minutes. Part of me wanted to believe this could be a turning point, a chance to find some kind of peace with my family. The rational part of me remembered years of disappointment and prepared for more of the same. Nevertheless, I rearranged my schedule, delegated my case load to colleagues, and booked a red-eye flight to Chicago for Friday night. I even spent an absurd amount at a boutique near my office, purchasing a dress that walked the fine line between professional and festive, something my mother could not possibly criticize. As an afterthought, I bought gifts, an expensive scotch for my father, a silk scarf for my mother, and a rare first-edition book about Chicago architecture for my grandfather. For Michael and Isabella, I selected a high-end serving platter from their wedding registry that they had not received. The night before my flight, my grandfather called. His voice, warm and slightly gravelly with age, was a balm to my Irvs, Serena, my girl, I hear you are coming home for the big dinner. Hi, Grandpa, yes, though I am not entirely sure what the occasion is. There was a pause on the line. Your mother did not tell you, just that it is a special family dinner and everyone needs to be there. There was another pause. Well, I suppose they want it to be a surprise, but listen to me carefully, Serena. No matter what happens tomorrow night, promise me you will not leave early, not even if you feel hurt or angry. Can you promise me that? His request was strange enough to send a ripple of unease through me. Grandpa, you are scaring me a little. What is going on? Nothing to be scared about, he assured me, just an old man asking for your patience. Promise me you will stay until the end of the evening no matter what. Did I promise? I said, curiosity thoroughly piqued. But you would tell me if something serious was happening, right? Everything will make sense tomorrow night, he said cryptically, and Serena, I am proud of you, always have been. Those words carried me through the overnight flight, the uncomfortable taxi ride from O'Hare Airport, and the familiar drive through the winding streets of my childhood neighborhood. As the taxi approached the house, I felt the usual mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The family home looked exactly as it always had, imposing white columns, perfectly manicured lawn flower beds, bursting with spring blooms that my mother meticulously planned each year. The sight of it brought a flood of memories, both good and painful. I remembered running through the sprinklers on hot summer days, building snowmen on the front lawn, leaving for prom in a blue dress my mother deemed acceptable, and driving away for college with a heart full of relief and fear. This house had shaped me for better or worse. The taxi driver helped me with my small suitcase, and I took a deep breath before walking up the familiar front steps. Before I could knock, the door swung open to reveal my mother, perfectly poised as always, wearing a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Serena, you made it. How was your flight? She air-kissed my cheek, the scent of her expensive perfume enveloping me in a cloud of memories. It was fine, Mom. Thanks for having me. I stepped into the foyer immediately, noticing how little had changed. Same antique console table, same ornate mirror, same feeling of stepping into a museum where I might break something valuable. Everyone is in the living room. Your father is mixing drinks, she said, giving me a quick once-over. That dress is nice. New? Yes, I bought it for tonight. The fact that she had not found fault with my appearance was startling enough that I nearly missed the sounds of laughter coming from the living room. I followed her through the hallway, steeling myself for whatever awaited me. The living room was a tableau of family harmony that immediately made me feel like an intruder. My father stood at the bar cart, pouring what looked like expensive whiskey. Michael and Isabella sat close together on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders, her head tilted toward him in intimate conversation. My grandfather was the only one who looked up when I entered, his face breaking into a genuine smile. There she is, Grandpa George said warmly, rising from his armchair with some effort. He embraced me tightly, whispering, remember your promise, before releasing me. My father nodded in my direction. Serena, drink. Michael finally noticed my presence. Hey, sis. Long time no see. His greeting was casual, as if we had not gone months without speaking. Isabella turned to face me, and I immediately noticed something different about her. She was glowing in a way that had nothing to do with makeup, and her hand rested protectively over her stomach, and suddenly I understood the reason for the special family dinner. Isabella was pregnant, and my brother was going to be a father, and somehow my mother decided that I needed to be present for this announcement despite our strained relationship and the distance, both geographical and emotional, that separated us. The realization sent a complicated mix of emotions through me. A certain wistfulness because despite everything, the idea of being an aunt had a surprising appeal, hurt because once again, I was an afterthought, summoned to witness another milestone in my brother's perfect life, and resignation because this was exactly the kind of family moment that highlighted my status as the odd one out. Serena, come sit, my mother directed, gesturing to a chair slightly apart from the main seating arrangement. I complied, accepting the gin and tonic my father handed me without comment. What followed was an hour of strained small talk, during which I learned that Michael had made junior partner at my father's firm, Isabella had redecorated their entire house, and my parents were planning a cruise to the Mediterranean in the fall. No one asked about my life in Seattle, my work, or my recent promotion. I was present but invisible, an audience member rather than a participant, only my grandfather made any real effort to include me, asking about a case I had mentioned during our last phone call that I had barely begun to answer when Isabella interrupted with a comment about feeling slightly nauseated, immediately drawing all attention back to her. The stage was set for what would become the most memorable and painful family dinner of my life. Dinner is served, my mother announced at precisely 7 o'clock, just as she had for every family meal of my childhood. That we filed into the formal dining room, a space reserved for special occasions and important guests. The table was set with the good china, crystal glasses, and sterling silver flatware that had been passed down through generations. Candles flickered in ornate silver holders, and a floral centerpiece that must have cost a small fortune dominated the middle of the table. It was clear that my mother had pulled out all the stops for this evening. That I automatically moved toward my usual place, the seat to my father's left, only to find Isabella already settling into the chair. She looked up at me with a smile that held a hint of triumph. "Oh, Serena, I hope you do not mind. Elaine thought I should sit here since." She patted her stomach meaningfully. Before I could respond, my mother appeared at my elbow. "Serena, you can sit down at the other end next to your grandfather." It was a clear demotion in the family hierarchy. The seat next to Grandpa George had always been reserved for visiting relatives or friends, never for immediate family. That I glanced at my father, hoping for some small sign of support, but he was focused on pouring wine, deliberately avoiding my gaze. That I swallowed my hurt and moved to the designated chair. Grandpa George squeezed my hand under the table as I sat down, a small gesture of solidarity that meant more than he could know. Dinner began with my father offering a toast to family, he said, raising his glass, and to new beginnings. His eyes rested pointedly on Isabella's still flat stomach. "Speaking of new beginnings," Michael said, rising from his seat with a grin. "Isabella and I have an announcement to make." He looked down at his wife with adoration. "We are expecting. The baby is due in November." Despite having already deduced this news, I forced a smile and offered congratulations along with everyone else. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. "A grandchild," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I cannot believe I am finally going to be a grandmother." "And I, a grandfather," my father added, raising his glass again to the next generation of our family. What followed was a detailed discussion of the pregnancy data so far, Isabella's nursery plans and speculation about whether the baby would be a boy or girl. My parents were clearly hoping for a grandson to carry on the family name, while Isabella coyly suggested she had a feeling it was a boy. "We have already started looking at preschools," Isabella announced. "The waiting lists for the good ones are incredibly long in Chicago. Your father can make a call to Phillips Academy," my mother assured her. Family legacy still counts for something. That I picked at my roast beef and asparagus, feeling increasingly disconnected from the conversation. No one had asked a single question about my life or work since we sat down. It was as if I had become invisible, a ghost at my own family table. When I finally attempted to join the conversation during a brief lull mentioning a childhood memory of Michael, my brother barely acknowledged it. Before steering the topic back to the baby. "We are thinking of converting the guest room in our house to a nursery," he said, "but honestly it might be too small." My father set down his fork. "You know, your mother and I have been discussing this. This house has always been meant for a family. It has 5 bedrooms, a yard for children to play in. It might make sense for you and Isabella to consider moving in here." I nearly choked on my wine. "What about you and Mom and Grandpa in the guest house?" My father waved a dismissive hand. "Your mother has been wanting to downsize. We could find a nice condo in the city." "And your grandfather?" He glanced at Grandpa George, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "Well, we could find suitable arrangements." "Suitable arrangements?" I echoed, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Grandpa has lived in the guest house since Grandma died. It is his home now." "Serena," my mother interjected. "This is a family discussion. We are simply exploring options, and I am not family." The words escaped before I could stop them. A heavy silence fell over the table. My mother's lips thinned into a tight line. My father studied his plate with sudden interest. Michael looked uncomfortable. but remained silent. It was Isabella who broke the silence. Well, Serena, you have made it pretty clear where your priorities lie. You chose to move across the country, you rarely visit, you miss important family events. And now we are planning for the future for a new generation and you seem upset that you are not the center of attention. Her words were like a slap. I set down my fork carefully, trying to maintain my composure. That is not what I said. I am simply concerned about Grandpa being pushed out of his home to accommodate your plans. No one is pushing anyone out, my father said firmly. We are discussing what is best for the family as a whole. The family as a whole, or just the parts of it you approve of? I asked quietly. My mother's face flushed with anger. Serena, that is enough. This dinner is supposed to be a celebration, not another opportunity for you to make everything about your grievances. I am not making anything about me, I protested. I just think Grandpa should have a say in whether he is moved out of his home. George understands family obligations, my mother said dismissively. Unlike some people at this table, the implication hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable, that I was the outsider, the one who did not understand family obligations because I had chosen a different path. Perhaps, Isabella suggested, her tone falsely sweet, Serena would be more comfortable eating in the kitchen since she seems determined to disrupt our special evening. I stared at her in disbelief, then looked to my brother, expecting him to defend me, but Michael merely looked down at his plate, conflict evident on his face, but no words coming to my defense. My mother stood suddenly. That might be best, Serena. If you cannot be supportive and positive on this special occasion, perhaps you should excuse yourself. Mom, I began, but she cut me off. No, I have. Had enough. For years, you have chosen to separate yourself from this family, and now you want to have a say in family decisions. You left, Serena. You do not get to waltz back in and judge how we live our lives or plan our future. I left because I never felt like I belonged here, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother's expression hardened. And you were right, you do not belong here, Serena, not anymore. The words landed like physical blows. I looked around the table, hoping someone would contradict her, would offer some word in my defense. My father stared stoically at his wine glass, Michael examined his hands, Isabella wore a small, satisfied smile, only Grandpa George met my gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. Slowly, I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten meal and stood. I think I will go pack my things that I can catch a late flight back to Seattle. No one protested. No one asked me to stay. I walked out of the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, fighting back tears until I was safely upstairs in the guest room. With shaking hands, I began to gather my belongings, shoving clothes haphazardly into my suitcase. All I could think about was escaping, getting as far away from this house and these people as possible. The tiny hope I had harbored that this visit might represent a new beginning had been thoroughly extinguished. I was zipping my suitcase when there was a soft knock at the door. Expecting my grandfather, I was surprised when I opened it to find Michael standing there looking uncomfortable. Serena, I am sorry about what happened down there. Are you? I asked, too emotionally exhausted to soften my tone. Because you sat there and said nothing while your wife suggested I eat in the kitchen like a disobedient child, and our mother told me I do not belong in this family. He had the grace to look ashamed. It is complicated. Isabella is pregnant and her hormones are all over the place, and Mom and Dad are just excited about the baby. That does not excuse treating me like I do not matter. I said quietly. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from our childhood that it made my heart ache. Look, maybe it would be better if you did go back to Seattle. Give everyone some time to cool off. I will talk to them, make them understand. It was clear from his tone that he had no real intention of standing up for me, that he just wanted the conflict to disappear, wanted me to disappear so he could return to his perfect life with his perfect wife and their perfect future baby. Goodbye, Michael, I said, picking up my suitcase. Congratulations on the baby. I hope you will be a better father than you have been a brother. I brushed past him and headed downstairs, pulling my phone out to call a taxi. I in the foyer, I paused to collect myself, not wanting to leave in tears. That was when I heard the argument coming from the dining room. This is not what Margaret would have wanted. My grandfather's voice, usually so gentle, was raised in anger. She would be ashamed of how you have treated her tonight. Dad, please, my father responded. Serena made her choice years ago when she rejected everything we tried to give her. You never gave her acceptance, Grandpa George shot back. You never gave her the freedom to be herself. I moved closer to the door, unable to help myself. She abandoned this family, my mother insisted. She has no right to criticize our decisions now. Decisions about a house that might not even be yours to make, my grandfather replied cryptically. There was a pause, then my father's confused voice. What are you talking about, George? Before I could hear the answer, the front door opened behind me and I turned to see my taxi had arrived. It was time to leave this house and the painful memories it contained, perhaps for the last time. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. My heart heavy, but my resolve firm. I would build a life without these people who could not accept me for who I was. I would create my own family from friends who valued me. I had just reached for the doorknob when I heard my grandfather's voice behind me. Serena, wait. Do not leave. Not yet. I turned to find him standing there, leaning slightly on his cane, a determined expression on his weathered face. Come back to the dining room, he said. There is something everyone needs to hear. Grandpa George's hand was warm and firm on my arm as he guided me back toward the dining room. I hesitated at the threshold, reluctant to subject myself to more humiliation, but the look in my grandfather's eyes gave me courage. Whatever was about to happen, he seemed certain it would be worth staying for. The scene in the dining room was tense. My parents sat rigidly in their chairs, wearing identical expressions of controlled anger. Michael looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his napkin. Isabella's face was a mask of polite disdain. All eyes turned to us as we entered. Harold, my mother said coldly, Serena was just leaving. No, she was not, my grandfather replied with surprising authority. Serena is staying because what I have to say concerns her most of all. He guided me to my abandoned seat and remained standing, suddenly appearing taller and more commanding than his 84 years would suggest. I had planned to do this differently, he began, but after witnessing how Serena has been treated tonight, I can no longer wait. Dad, whatever this is, can it not wait until tomorrow? My father asked, clearly wanting to avoid further conflict. No, Robert, it cannot. My grandfather reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew an envelope. What I am about to tell you will change things in this family and it is long overdue. He placed the envelope on the table. Before Margaret died, she made certain arrangements regarding this house, arrangements she asked me to keep private until the right moment. I believe that moment has come. My mother frowned. What arrangements? This house has been in Robert's family for generations. Actually, Christine, that is not entirely accurate. Grandpa George's voice was calm but firm. Yes, I built this house, but when Margaret and I established our trust 22 years ago, we put the house in her name for tax purposes. It became hers to dispose of as she wished. My father leaned forward, confusion creasing his brow. What are you saying, Dad? I am saying that before she died, Margaret changed her will. She left this house to Serena. The words hung in the air for a long moment before the room erupted. That is impossible, my father sputtered. There must be some mistake, my mother insisted. Michael sat in stunned silence while Isabella's face flushed with anger. I was equally shocked. Grandpa, what are you talking about? Grandma left me the house, why would she do that? Grandpa George opened the envelope and spread several legal documents on the table. Margaret always saw something special in you, Serena. She recognized your independent spirit, your determination to make your own path. She worried that this family's traditional values might stifle that spirit. He handed a document to my father, who scanned it with growing disbelief. This cannot be legal, he muttered. It is completely legal, my grandfather assured him, reviewed by multiple attorneys. the house and property were transferred into a trust with Serena as the sole beneficiary upon Margaret's death, that I have been the trustee managing the property until the right time to tell Serena about her inheritance. And you decided the right time was in the middle of a family dinner? My mother asked incredulously. No, Grandpa George replied firmly, the right time was Hen Serena turned 32, which is still 2 years away, but after hearing you tell her she does not belong in this house, a house that is legally hers, I could not remain silent any longer. I stared at my grandfather, trying to process this revelation. But why did Grandma not tell me herself? Why keep it a secret all these years? She wanted you to find your own way first without this responsibility influencing your choices. She believed you needed freedom to discover who you are before taking on the legacy of this house. My father slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. You have both betrayed this family. This house should stay with those who appreciate its history, who will continue its traditions. Like you, I asked quietly, the same people who were just discussing moving Grandpa out so Michael and Isabella could raise their baby here. Isabella's eyes narrowed. You cannot possibly think you can just take our family home. It is not your family home, my grandfather corrected gently. It legally belongs to Serena and has since Margaret passed 6 years ago. Michael finally found his voice. So what happens now? Serena kicks us all out, sells the house out from under us, takes revenge for how she feels she has been treated. All eyes turned to me, and I realized I was facing a pivotal moment. The power dynamic in our family had shifted dramatically, placing me in a position I had never sought or expected. The house that had been the scene of so much childhood pain and adult rejection was impossibly mine. I need time to think, I said finally. This is all too sudden. There is nothing to think about, my mother declared, rising from her chair. This is some kind of mistake or manipulation. We will contest this. Sit down, Christine, my grandfather said with surprising force. The documents are ironclad, Margaret made sure of that. He turned to me. Serena, I know this is overwhelming, but your grandmother believed in you. She knew you would make the right decisions when the time came. I looked around the table at the faces of my family members, my father's anger, my mother's denial, Michael's confusion, Isabella's calculation, and suddenly I understood what my grandmother had done. She had given me not just property, but power, the power to redefine my place in this family on my own terms. I need some air, I said, standing up. Grandpa, will you join me on the porch? He nodded, and we left the dining room together, leaving the others in stunned silence. Outside, the spring evening was cool and clear, stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Why did you not tell me sooner? I asked once we were seated on the porch swing that had been my favorite thinking spot as a child. Margaret was very specific in her instructions, he explained. She wanted you to establish yourself independently, to know your own strength before you knew about the inheritance. She feared that if you knew too soon, you might either stay in Chicago out of obligation or reject the house entirely out of rebellion. She knew me well, I admitted with a small smile. Better than you might think. She kept all your letters from college, read them over and over. She was so proud of the woman you were becoming. I felt tears prick my eyes. I miss her. So do I. Every day, he patted my hand. But she would be proud of you now, Serena, standing up for yourself, building a life on your own terms. What am I supposed to do with a house in Chicago when my life is in Seattle? I asked. Whatever you want, he replied simply. It is yours to live in, sell, rent out, or share with family on your own terms. Inside, I could hear raised voices as my parents, brother, and sister-in-law processed the shocking news. Their world had been upended just as mine had. They will never forgive me, I said quietly. Maybe, maybe not, but for the first time, you have the power to set the terms of your relationship with them. Margaret wanted to give you that choice. As we sat there watching nightfall over the neighborhood where I had grown up, I began to see the possibilities before me. This inheritance was not just about property, that it was about reclaiming my place in a family that had pushed me to the margins, that it was about having the power to decide what family meant to me. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged in this place, not because my family accepted me, but because I had the right to define what belonging meant. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and decisions. But tonight, sitting beside my grandfather on the porch of what was now my house, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in this place for a very long time.